you, Christine. So, earlier this year, I was screening a film at a science fiction festival for which I was executive producer, and we were very excited, and we had a great crowd, and it was almost at the end of the film, and the projectionist actually passed out, and his head hit the projector, and he and the projector and the amp and the soundboard all fell down the stairs into the audience about 10 minutes before the end of the film. So I rushed down, we turned on the lights, I rushed down to the stage and I said, well, ladies and gentlemen, we've had a small technical malfunction, so I'm going to do the Q&A now while we sort everything out. Luckily, he didn't die. So I have learned through experience that the most memorable screenings are always the ones where something goes wrong. And I first want to thank Paul Hildebrandt, our very talented director, for being so very gracious. And I know it's upsetting when you've put your heart and soul and time and money, and probably time and money of a lot of friends and relatives as well, into something you're very passionate about, and then it doesn't go exactly as you'd hoped. Paul, please let me tell you, the fact that everybody stayed, I didn't see one person leave, the fact that everybody stayed through the technical malfunctions says how much they've enjoyed the film. So please take that as a big compliment. So those of you who work in spaceflight and are students of spaceflight history know that you so very often have to fix something with the pieces that you have in hand, don't have time to manufacture something new. So, because of that, we don't have any microphones up here, so I will ask you to please bear with us. If you have questions, please speak up. If you can't hear us, please move closer. We're very friendly, and we have an enthusiastic and interesting group here. And on my right, a really extraordinary assemblage of panelists. And rather than try to sum up their amazing lives myself, which will take ages, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to start by please saying a few words about themselves, and then we're going to start talking about the film.
If you didn't hear previously, I'm Paul Hildebrandt, I'm the director. And again, this film came about because I wanted to know why we weren't going back to the moon, or going to Mars, or doing anything other than, when I first thought about this, we were still launching a shuttle. You know, why we weren't doing anything other than just going back and forth, and why are the Russians flying us to the space station? I was tired of the complacency, and I wanted to do what I could to contribute to the cause and see spaceflight evolve into something greater. And with that, I interviewed pretty much anybody who would talk to me. I went to the National Space Symposium twice. I went to this event a couple years ago in LA. I went to the New Space Conference. I went to SETICon. I went to all sorts of events. I went to McMoon's. I went twice. I went to McMoon's. And I tried to assemble what I thought was a, from my outsider perspective, an unbiased view of the problems and history of human space exploration. So, I don't know if I accomplished that, but that's what I tried to do. Next.
Yeah, I'm Dale Skran. I'm Executive Vice President of the National Space Society. I'm also the Chair of the National Space Society Policy Committee. I'm also the National Space Society representative to the Alliance for Space Development. I've been involved in this for a long time. I guess my involvement in this is that I guess Christine asked me to review the movie, and I said I did, and I said it's great. There's a lot of things I don't like about it, but it really should be seen at the ISDC, and that's why we're here right now.
Yeah. All right.
Hi, I'm Dennis, and I'm a lunatic. No. My name is Dennis Wingo. I'm the CEO of Skycorp Incorporated. Done a lot of work related to lunar development over the past, almost 30 years now. Started in this with Lunar Prospector, when Lunar Prospector was a private mission to the moon in 1989 through the Space Studies Institute in Jerry O'Neill worked with the also the NSS chapter in Houston. The Houston Space Society put on one of the very first symposia on Lunar Prospector in March of 1989, when we were just starting the project, and Lunar Prospector eventually flew as a NASA mission through NASA Ames and Alan Binder, but it was through a lot of the efforts of the National Space Society and the Space Studies Institute. And we continued on the lunatic track with Pete Warden and the Clementine mission, which was Pete's way of getting around the anti-ballistic missile treaty at the time, and then continuing to work and to push for a return to the moon through the Bush junior years, when it was the Vision for Space Exploration, which was the successor to the Space Exploration Initiative. So we've been around this wheel several times. I think right now we're probably, based on things that have just happened in the past year or two, probably in the most hopeful time in all of our lives. And I look out over this crowd, and I've known some of you for a very long time when none of us had gray hair. And I lament the fact that many of those, when I first started, who did have gray hair, who are no longer with us, who waited for this to happen and it didn't happen. I think we're on the cusp of lunar development actually happening. So much for L5 and 95, but by God, we're going to get there one way or another.
Well, I'm Howard Bloom. First, I've got to say, this film is amazing. It's an astonishing, astonishing achievement. And it hits a hot button, possibly 5 hot buttons. So you're to be thanked and congratulated by everybody who believes in a future in space. I'm Howard Bloom. I'm the author of 6 books. I appear on 500 radio stations. I've done that 200 times now. I'm the founder of the Space Development Steering Committee, the founder and chair of the Asian Space Technology Summit, which we just had in Malaysia a couple of weeks ago. And I want to see us get back into space.
Professionally, I'm a PhD research astronomer. I'm principal investigator of NASA's CosmoQuest project. Anything I say tonight is my own personal opinion. I express only my own ideas. If you want to tweet, though, it's Starstrider with a Y. That's who I am on Twitter. Now, I've been speaking before folks like you since '88, when I was a 13-year-old girl. I've been wanting to not be the youngest speaker in the room for about 20 years. I'm the youngest speaker in the room. I was born in '73, and this means that I was born post-Apollo, that I am also old enough to not only have a child, but to have a child who has a child. So think about that. There are 3 generations born post-Apollo. Why the hell am I the youngest person up here?
Damn straight.
So I work in Science Mission Directorate. I'm funded by our robot overlords. May they please return healthy data. And I am looking to inspire new generations to go into science, to go into space, and to try and figure out how to keep things going. But one challenge I want to say to all of you is it's really hard to come to something like this and be the youngest one in the room so much, to the point that earlier this evening when I was trying to find registration, a very friendly soul looked at me and said, well, you should have come earlier to register. You should probably come back tomorrow morning. And I had to point out I'm one of tonight's speakers, and I thought they'd let me in the room. So, yeah, we need to keep inspiring. And it's not just about going to space. It's about finding new reasons, new ideas, and changing the dynamic, and retiring also. The average age of people doing this nowadays is over 50, and the average retirement age is over 70.
I'm Rob Kelso. and I am really a child of Apollo. I hook, drag, and sinker. I spent 38 years at NASA, and I can tell you I lived the dream. I left because I was dissatisfied at the end of 2011 with the direction of NASA. It was not the NASA I hired into. I will tell you that in 5th grade, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. In 5th grade. And it said what I took at junior college, it laid out what I took in high school and in college. I knew in 5th grade that I wanted to be an astronaut or I wanted to work in mission control. I was so tied in with the Gemini program, the Apollo program, and that's all I wanted to work with. I had no idea what I would do if I didn't get hired. 5th grade, I have 5 kids, 3 of them are in college, 2 in high school, and even the ones in college have no idea what they want to do with their life. I knew in 5th grade. I started at NASA the day after I graduated from high school. I hadn't been to college one day yet. I was a baby co-op. They don't even exist anymore. That was May 1973.
I wasn't born yet.
They had just launched the Skylab workshop, and they had just launched the Skylab 2 crew, Conrad Weitz and Kerwin, when I started at NASA. I missed the Apollo program by 6 months in my career. I missed the moon by 6 months, and it bothered me ever since. But I went on to be a flight controller on STS-1 and Mission Control. And then I spent 12 years as the shuttle flight director in the 80s and 90s, directing 25 shuttle missions. Most of my specialty was flying DoD payloads that they never thought could ever fly in shuttle, and I had to figure out how. Unbelievable. But I would tell you that my mentor, I was really blessed to have Gene Kranz as a mentor. As a young student or a young engineer, I was single, eating turkey pot pies, TV dinners at night. So he invited myself and a couple others of us from flight control to the Knights of Columbus once a week. $5, you get a steak, baked potato salad, a drink, and a dessert. So I think this was Gene's way of making sure that some of his young engineers got at least one good meal a month, you know. And afterwards, he invited the 3 of us to his house, and that went on for about a year. And at his house, he would talk about all the war stories. Back in when rockets were blowing up in the late 50s, he talked about the Mercury program, the Gemini program, and this went on weekly at night for about a year, once a week. And what I thought he was doing was sharing just good war stories. But it did not dawn on me until I was selected as a flight director. I was selected in 1988, right after Challenger. I was in the flight director class right after the Challenger explosion. And I didn't realize till then that he wasn't just talking about war stories. He was passing on heritage. He was passing on value of flight control, how we do manned space flight. He was talking about risk management, how we make decisions. He was passing on that type of heritage, but through war stories. What a great mentor I had. But I lived the dream. I am exactly what that is, and I would not change that. The best part of my whole career was the 12 years that I was the flight director in Mission Control. I did the last flight. I was the lead flight director in the last flight out of Ficker 2, which is the old Apollo Ficker. They're just now restoring that. I did the last flight out of that room. So this film really touches my heart because I identify with that as the child of Apollo. That's all I ever wanted to do in my life. Now I find myself in unmanned programs working on things to go back to the moon. I'm an unmanned lunar advocate. So I still hope, even though I missed the moon by 6 months, starting in May of '73, I still hope in my lifetime, my career, before I retire, to be back, have a part of the moon program. I can't leave until I leave.
I told you we had a really great panel, right?
Yes, can I just throw in one word
Please.
since we're doing extended introductions? This year, the reason that I'm at ISDC is to advocate a radical reinvention of NASA. And I'm advocating that NASA get out of the rocket business, that it stop the Space Launch System program dead in its tracks, that it stop the Orion, the so-called multi-purpose vehicle that can't do anything, dead in its tracks, that it take that $3 billion and redirect it to creating a permanent transport infrastructure in space with gas stations, rest stops, and everything else, ISRU units, everything else that you need in order to have a space program. That's where NASA needs to put that $3 billion a year that's being thrown away on a rocket that's too expensive to fly.
I'm glad you piped up, and we're going to come back to that later. Since we've had such lovely introductions, I want to ask the panel a question before we get into some specifics. And I thought of this because of the marvelous quote from Rick Tumlinson in the film, and I just paraphrased it, but he was talking about the generation that grew up watching Star Trek and the Apollo missions, and how it made them want to stay at school and learn, and this idea of, well, I want to do that, and how inspirational the 1960s and 70s space programs were to that generation, who then did go out and do amazing things. So I'd like to ask each of our panelists if there was a pivotal moment or thing in your life that led you down this path to being space science and education advocates, and if that has fueled you through to today, how perhaps have your views changed since then? Howard, let's start with you.
Well, you have to understand that the brain, as you're maturing as a child, goes through certain phases where it's open to a new influence of some kind, a new role model. And then your brain literally wraps its morphology around that figure who becomes a guide for you for the rest of your life. I call it passion points in my work. My passion point having to do with space came when I was 10 years old. I was growing up in Buffalo, New York. Not a single soul in Buffalo seemed to want to have anything to do with me, including my parents. And I saw a program called Tom Corbett's Space Cadet. It was a program put together by Willy Ley. Willy Ley was Wernher von Braun's partner before 1933 in the German Rocket Club. And Willy Ley put out this piece of fantasy, future science fiction television, and I thought, if I didn't feel this, I felt this. If there's no room for me in Buffalo, if there's no room for me on Earth, maybe there's room for me in this strange place called space.
I think there's two. For me, one, I was 6 years old. I'm from a military family, and one of my uncles was stationed at Patrick Air Force Base after being stationed in Okinawa for many years. And I was 6 years old, and this was on November 2nd, 1966, right before the launch of Gemini 12, which was Buzz's first flight as Buzz and John Young. We rode by the gantry because my uncle had all of the right stickers on his car. We rode right by the gantry 2 days before launch, and the vehicle, you could see all the steam coming out of it and all this kind of stuff. And I had already been very much interested in space, watched every one of the Gemini missions on TV. Jules Bergman was my guy for ABC, science guy in the 1960s. And so that absolutely, but then the second that kind of was formative, I really wanted to do space, but I had a whole career in the computer industry. And then in 1990, there was a space summit in Huntsville, Alabama. And it was the beginning of what was called the Space Exploration Initiative. There's this whole bunch of NASA people and industry people, and they're all up there talking about, yeah, we're going to go back to the moon, we're going to do all this, we're going to do that. And and they're just talking about it, and I got so incensed about it. And I was never a public speaker before this incident. And I got up to the microphone, and this is actually, they wrote about this later, the people from Huntsville, and I became really good friends with a lot of the old Germans and the rocket scientists from Huntsville. I said, what are you people doing? You're up here talking about what we want to do, what we might do, and all this. What the hell are you doing right now to get us back to the moon? It's been 20 years, over 20 years since we've been to the moon, and all you people are doing is talking about it. I want to see action. I want us to go to the moon. I don't want to hear any of this talk anymore. And that was kind of my very, very first ever real public speaking. And that kind of launched me on that mode of advocacy that I wasn't going to take it anymore. I wanted to be a part of it. And I was on the Lunar Prospector team and all of this. And it's just like, damn it, one way or another, as someone once said about being in the military, act as if the entire fight depends on you. Act as if victory or defeat depends on you, and just go for it. And that was my real turning point that led me to where I'm at, sitting at right now.
So you're a troublemaker, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
I like you already. Pamela, you're a very well-known and highly respected communicator. You've touched a lot of people of all ages through your work. What about you? Was there a pivotal moment for you that set you on this?
So I'm going to have a
engaging?
story completely different from everyone else.
Is that because you're the youngest?
Yes. So I remember as a very small child being made to take naps in the afternoon so that I could stay up late to watch Voyager images coming back that were on TV. And I remember when I was about kindergarten age, we lived in Newbury Park, California, and that was when they were periodically landing the space shuttle at Edwards Air Force Base, and the contrails were something that we could see from my backyard.
And the sonic boom.
And, well, I don't remember the sonic boom, but I was like 5, so I do remember running back and forth from the backyard and the television where I could see the images from the airplanes, the chase planes, and running into the backyard to see the contrails and back and forth because little kids have energy. But I was a stupid little kid, and all little kids love space and dinosaurs, and I also knew all my dinosaurs at that age. But space is a way of always winning. After all, it was an asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. So I have to admit, I got here by science fiction. I was a little kid that watched way too much Battlestar Galactica because the original one was awesome if you were 5. And all of the characters were named after like Greek gods. And so I started studying the Greek gods, and I was like, all the constellations are named after these myths, and I got into the constellations, and from the constellations I got into the planets, from the planets and the constellations I got into spacecraft. And I started writing fan fiction and studying space in late elementary school because I was a nerd. And I could have simply stayed a simple fan fiction writing, science fiction geeky little girl, because girls are still being told you don't belong in space. I, like many other women, was given a C for my own good in high school in physics because I could learn disappointment early and wouldn't get into a college program that would just lead to a career of heartache, is how my physics teacher explained it. But while I was dealing with that with my school system, I, in 8th grade, went to space camp because nerd, and pretended to fly the space shuttle and launch the Hubble. Pretended in '88, because we knew Hubble was coming. It just had a different name at that point. And I, in 9th grade, was assigned to write a letter to something that I perceived as a problem because it was part of our civic learning in 9th grade. And I actually wrote to the National Space Society because Ad Astra only advertised events for old people. And I was grouchy. Apparently I still am. And the local chapter was like, ooh, articulate young woman, we are going to have her do things. And so I lobbied for the National Space Society and spoke before chapters and clubs in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, lobbying for Space Shuttle C and talking in DC and in congressional offices. And then I was sent to the Soviet Union as an international science exchange, because that's how they built world peace, because science comes from war. And so I had a visa negotiated at very high levels that me and one other student spent 6 months working over at the 6-meter telescope. And then I came back, and as a high school student, I worked in radio astronomy. And then in university, I worked in variable star astronomy. And I remember being told at every stage, don't worry about aeronautics and astronautics, because all the cool stuff will be finished before you finish your PhD, but we're still building the great observatories, so focus on science. Well, I'm now about the age that people start going into the astronaut corps, and all the cool stuff is still waiting to be done. Thank God for robots. And hopefully we can change it so that we're saying more than thank God for robots, because humans have better working thumbs.
Thanks, Pamela. Rob, you sort of set us on this track with your lovely introduction. Would you care to elaborate on that
Yeah.
anymore? Was there kind of early moment before your NASA career that was really your spark?
Yeah, a wild one, because it would never happen today. Anybody who's worked in the space program has unbelievable, never happened stories. So it's how I came to NASA. The year I was a high school senior in Houston, Manned Space Flight Center had decided to institute a pilot program for high school graduates to go along with the co-op program. The co-op program, you go to school a semester, you work a semester, you go to school a semester, it takes 5 years to graduate, but you get a lot of work experience. So I decided to do one for high school seniors where you work the summer after your high school year, plus the Christmas vacation. But the program was set up to hire 20 minority students out of the Houston-Galveston area, African American and Hispanics. Well, I don't quite fit that bill. So my high school counselor, I wanted this so bad, like 5th grade, right? My high school counselor wrote a recommendation to NASA that says, Rob's an A student, honor roll, all this, and he is a red-haired boy. And red hair classifies him as a minority. That would never happen today. So, when I graduated from high school, there were 19 African Americans and Hispanics and one Howley, one white kid with red hair that started at NASA that year. Unbelievable.
Excellent. Good job representing your minority there.
First of all, other than Pamela, I'm actually the youngest one at the table. But I was born in 1985, so, you know, we weren't, obviously the moon was way gone, but I was inspired by, you know, Star Trek, science fiction, and what books we had in my school, my elementary school library. We had a section on space that was like this big, and there were books on the shuttle and, you know, books on the Apollo program, and we used to watch these cheesy videos in class that, you know, showed the shuttle going up, like the videos I showed in the movie. And as far back as I can remember, I was always fascinated by space. And I don't really have any exciting event to share. I just have always loved it and have always wanted to somehow be a part of it.
That's a really good answer. Dale, how about you?
I've decided I'm going to refuse to answer the question. If somebody wants to know my touching, nostalgic story about why I'm here, I'll tell you after this. And the reason I'm not going to mention it is that many space advocates are consumed with nostalgia for the 60s, and I don't want to contribute to that. We should be literally fighting for the future, and I don't want to contribute to that nostalgic feeling. One reason why there are so few young folks in this room is because they are out actually building the future. They are working at Rocket Lab in New Zealand, where they just launched their first electron. They're working at Planet and Spire and Made in Space and SpaceX and Bigelow and Blue. they're mostly not working in NASA, and they're mostly not at NSS. But this, I agree with Dennis, this is the most hopeful time I have ever seen in my entire life. And I was a space fan in the 60s. I love the Apollo thing. I'm being nostalgic, you're right. But now is the time, and you know, this is the time.
So Dale and I had a lovely lunch today, and we were talking about the film and space advocacy in general, and Dale said a few things that really stuck with me, and he made an observation that there's a scene, several scenes in the film where relatively young people are interviewed on the street, and it's kind of shocking that some of them really don't have a clue about what we did or what we are doing. And so Dale's comment was that those segments showed that we are doing a poor job of space advocacy. And so Dale, I ask you, what is the best way to do space advocacy? How can we improve on that, and how can we get our average age for these events lower and welcome new, younger enthusiasts into the fold?
Well, you trapped me here. I feel compelled to respond to the question rather than launch on one of my prearranged screeds.
Oh no, that's okay. Go on, do your prearranged thing. We'll come back to that.
Look, I'm going to try to do a serious answer to this. It's, you know, one of the reasons New Space has younger people is it's relevant to younger people. You can go there, you can meet entrepreneurs, you can potentially be hired into a space company. And NSS has done a fantastic job of having high school students come here for the Space Settlement Contest. It's an absolutely wonderful program. Apparently doesn't appeal much to young Americans, but it's a wonderful program. We have not done much to make NSS relevant to college students. And one of the few things we do, which I happen to be one of the main organizers of, is things like March Storm and the August Blitz. And we just did the March Storm in cooperation with the Space Frontier Foundation. I'd say 2/3 of the people involved were college students. So 2/3 of the people here are not college students. So we are doing things that appeal to college students, but I think they're very future oriented. So thank you, Paul. I'm going to shake your hand. I think this is a great film. It's very professionally made, and you shouldn't take any of my criticisms in a personal way. And you know, part of the reason we're here is because I think it's good to have a debate. It's good to think about things in a hard way, and this film's a great motivator for that discussion. There's a ton of good stuff here. The first part and the last part are really excellent. You know, you could quibble about this or that. Unfortunately, the middle part, if you cut it out and said why the shuttle and the ISS are a complete waste, it would be an excellent short film. Okay, because it has all sorts of arguments against the shuttle and against the space station that make them sound really, really terrible. And I'd just like to say that if the shuttle had not been used to build the space station, not only would Mr. Kelso have been unemployed, but we would not have the space station, and we probably would not have SpaceX. We would not have Made in Space, making fiber optics in space, probably the first product that's ever going to be manufactured in space that's actually going to make money. We would not have nanoracks launching CubeSats and doing everything they're doing in space. We very possibly would not have Bigelow. We would certainly not have Bigelow modules on the station, and a lot more, which I just don't have the time to explain. But I do agree, NASA has done a terrible job, and we have not really helped that much in terms of explaining how important the space station really is. I regard the space station as literally the foundation of our future in space.
Anyone else like to comment on that?
I'm going to jump in because I've been a very heavy advocate of the space station. The space station, in my opinion, is the greatest thing that NASA has been able to pull off since the Apollo program. And the reason for that is that, and I did historical research, my great-grandfather was the head of what's called the Master Mechanics Association in 1887 and 1888. And due to the magic of Google and digitizing documents around the country, I found my great-grandfather's speech when he opened the conference in 1887. What did he talk about? He talked about modular systems, standardization, how to make one railroad car reliably link up to another, how to make the national railroad system function as a coherent whole. It didn't at that time. Manufacturers did whatever they wanted. Standards were helpful suggestions at that time. And they even had prizes. The Westinghouse air brake, which changed the world in railroading, was only one of 3 competing systems at that time that they actually had a fly-off, to call it that, between the 3. And if you take a look at the International Space Station, it did the same thing. You had modules built by different countries that never saw each other until they were in space, but they were built to a common standard, a common testing regime, a common documentation standard. And this was one of my really large arguments, and people don't get this, I know Rob does, that one of the big things that we lost when we lost the space shuttle was that it was the documentation and processes that had been built up over 30 years for flying payloads, for doing qualifications, for doing this stuff, and the space station fortunately has carried that forward. I'm doing work with NASA JSC right now to fly some payloads to the space station. I actually signed the very first Space Act agreement in 2000 to deploy the very first satellite off the space station in 2001. So it's an amazing thing, and it has been underappreciated, just as the shuttle, and this was NASA underappreciating what they had, because NASA's actually a multi-headed beast. You have the development engineers, and then the development engineers, after everything's developed and flies, they hand it over to the operational guys. And this is not knocking my friend Rob, but a lot of the times the operational guys don't know what was in the minds of the people that designed and built the system. George Mueller, and when they designed the space shuttle was designed for some amazing things. They wanted to on-orbit assemble large geosynchronous communication satellites. They wanted the great observatories, the Solar Observatory, Hubble, GRO, all of those were designed. And Hubble was the only one he actually ever really did a lot with. But they were all designed to be serviced, upgraded, changed. And look at all the money. I was on a team several years ago where NASA was going to look at replacing Hubble instead of going up and doing the last servicing mission. Oh my God, the last servicing mission is going to cost $1 billion to fly the shuttle and $200 million for hardware to upgrade the Hubble to where it'll last many, many more years. We can fly a new telescope. Well, it was going to cost $2.6 billion to fly a new telescope. And then the NRO gives them the mirrors. Oh, it's only going to cost $1.6 billion. But we had a way, and John Grunsfeld and the team goes up there, and they basically rewire the entire Hubble telescope. They do stuff that none of the people that designed the Hubble thought could be done. And so there's just been an amazing kind of system that has grown up. And you have people, and I love Buzz Aldrin, and he and I go back and forth on this all the time. Buzz says, dump the space station, we need a cislunar gateway. Do you think the American taxpayer is going to like it? We dump a $100 billion asset that could be used to help support exploration. And so we have some wonderful, wonderful assets that we just have never properly used. At the same time now we're going, oh well, we want to dump the station. We want that $3 billion budget to go fly SLS. What? We have a wonderful system. We have wonderful ways of utilizing what we have. And in engineering, you don't go out and design something just because you can, especially when you have something that works right in front of you.
Thank you, Dennis. Pamela, you had a comment going back to the previous question.
Right, so I'd like to go back to Bigelow a minute. Bigelow is a fabulous example of a company that is ready to do amazing things and is stuck. So Robert Bigelow has been an advocate for expandable blow-up balloon, whatever you want to call them, spacecraft. Basically, think about your tent that goes into a little tiny bag that you can never put it back into correctly. But when you set it up, there's this huge space inside, and you don't have to launch empty space when you launch an inflatable. He successfully launched Genesis 1, Genesis 2. These were free-floating, expandable, 1/6 size modules. They successfully deployed 2 years ago the beam module attached to the International Space Station. That for the most part, the astronauts sit there going, it's extra space, I can't be inside. Because with NASA, everything has to be flight tested from here to tomorrow. And part of that, everything has to be flight tested from here to tomorrow, is we don't currently have a commercial, human-certified launch vehicle. SpaceX is trying to get there. Bigelow has the capacity with their, I believe it's B330 modules. I may have one of those threes wrong. That if it deploys successfully, it has solar panels, it has a docking port, they can actually put 4 of them together around a central module. They're ready to build something so that they estimate it would be $1 billion a night per human on board this thing. Not $1 billion, $1 million. It's currently more like $1 billion. It's $1 million. What's holding him back is they can't do this because there isn't a rocket they can launch on. And he has designed an even bigger version, which is something like the B2000, that if SLS works, they can launch on, except there's no free SLSs because we're looking at 2 or 3 launches a year in the foreseeable future, and every single one of them is accounted for. Now think about that. Every single one that is planned into the near future is currently accounted for, which means there's no way to launch novel ideas except through commercial spacecraft right now. And so this is where we really do need to take the idea you were talking about and basically say, let's keep pushing the commercial people to get them certified, to open these new pathways to space, to open these new ways that we can change how we do things. I work with a lot of NASA folks that are on the manned side of things. I live on the unmanned side of things, and I work with web servers. With a web server, if you launch something that's not completely right, your page looks like it was designed by Picasso, but nobody dies. And this gives me the freedom to be agile and innovative in what we do. Well, Elon Musk comes from that same agile mindset, but he is applying it to spacecraft. And right now, every single Falcon 9 is unique and upgraded from the last one. It's innovative, agile design on spacecraft. This is something NASA can't do given their current systems and protocols. It's a different culture. But because of his agile design, it changes how we think and how we do things. And this is where looking to a new generation, a younger generation with a different culture, changes what we're even capable of dreaming of doing.
Well, the moment is now for a very simple reason. We don't have to talk about problems anymore. We can talk about solutions. And the reason is that Bigelow is a solution with his B330s. Put 3 of those together around a common core, you have a moon base.
Yes.
It's just a question of when you can land it. It's what you talked about. We lack a rocket because of the Space Launch System. To have a viable Mars program would take between 12 and 32 launches of the Space Launch System. For the cost of 12 to 32 launches of the Space Launch System, you could buy, now listen to this figure, you could buy 20,000 launches of a SpaceX vehicle. That's not just a Mars program. That's inhabiting Mars and the near cosmos very, very rapidly. So we need to take that $3 billion. $3 billion is a lot of money. And it cost far less than $3 billion to develop Elon's rockets, to develop the Falcon Heavy. We'll see what it costs him to develop his interplanetary transport system. But the interplanetary transport system is a new relationship between life and space. because it can take 100 people or an equivalent amount of cargo to Mars. The Orion capsule, which is supposed to get us, in NASA's plan, to the moon, can't land on the moon. What's the point of getting into lunar orbit if you can't land? We landed, as your film has been pointing out, a long time ago. The Orion capsule cannot take people from Earth orbit to Martian orbit because it's too small. Astronauts would go crazy. They would end up cannibalizing each other. And it cannot land on Mars. So the entire SLS Orion program is a jobs program. The other day, I was talking to Taylor Dinnerman, somebody that Buzz Aldrin introduced me to 10 years ago. Taylor writes for the Wall Street Journal. I told him, I was in a cab on my way to the airport to come here. I told him that I was about to propose a radical reinvention of NASA and canceling SLS and the Orion program. And he said, oh, you can't do that. You're talking about getting rid of Marshall Space Flight Center and 27,000 jobs. And what about the 20,000 jobs in Mississippi? And what about the 20,000 jobs in Florida? In other words, he was saying, without realizing it, NASA's whole reason for existence, the whole reason for existence of its manned space program is as a jobs program. Well, we don't need NASA to be a jobs program. If we want jobs programs, we can put jobs programs together. We need to get into space. One of the things that I preach commonly is that a nation that looks up goes up. A nation that looks down goes down. We've been forced to look down by the stuff that Paul has outlined in his film. That's a sin. That's a crime. That's a blight on the human spirit. And what we're talking about is the human spirit. And what does the human spirit ache for? It aches to go places that no human has ever gone before. It aches to take life and ecosystems to places that no ecosystem has ever been before. It aches for the frontier beyond the next frontier. And unless you tap that energy, you don't have a viable space program. And unless you tap that energy, you don't have a viable civilization.
I want to comment real quick on David's just for the record. So, one of the things that I found when making the film is there's a huge problem with the space community, right? And that's, y'all don't agree on anything. I had one guy telling me that if you want to do a great science experiment with the space station, dump it into the ocean and see how big a wave it creates. Okay, that's the best science you can do. I had other people telling me that's, you know, that's the greatest thing ever. But nobody agrees on the same thing. Nobody, you know, the space station was supposed, and following up on what you were talking about, the space station was supposed to be Space Station Freedom originally. Yeah. It was supposed to be this huge thing. We were going to like dock spaceships to it and build things in orbit and send them out to Mars. And it got smaller and smaller and smaller and compromised. And correct me if I'm wrong on all this stuff.
No, you're right.
This is what I understand. And it became a jobs program, right? So NASA just keeps taking these grand ideas and making them smaller so that we can continue doing something, but that something was not what it was supposed to be.
Can I address this jobs program thing real fast?
I got to respond to this.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I apologize. Thank you.
It's all right. The jobs will still not be there when you're done.
I think the thing, I really appreciate what you have to say about space ethics not agreeing. That's just a fact. I mean, we have to live with that.
I hear a lot of people say NASA is a jobs program, and that is a partial truth. They are taking care of the civil servants who've been there for a long time. They're taking care of the people waiting for us to go back to the moon. They are having lots of internships and lots of postdocs for the people who've just finished their degree. But my generation is giving up because it's just too hard. There's a word in there, you all heard it say. And the problem is that we have an infrastructure problem and a budget problem that are working against one another. The infrastructure problem is you build buildings and you have to keep paying for them. You have air conditioning, you have heat, you have janitorial staff. And every time you have a great new program, you end up wanting to build a new specialized building. This is why Goddard gets bigger. This is why Ames gets bigger. And then you have new things you have to pay for. So, increasing costs. We have the cost of healthcare going up. We have all of these unmutable costs going up. And as NASA administrator after NASA administrator has been telling us, flat is the new up. Because that's the best we can hope for from Congress, is a flat budget from year to year. The budget is held flat, and the infrastructure costs go up. The cost of launching an astronaut on a Russian rocket has gone from about 30 million to, last I checked, it was around 55 million. It's now 73, okay. I got depressed and stopped reading. But NASA's budget is pretty much flat. Infrastructure prices are going up. Civil servants can't be fired. So we're losing my generation. It's a jobs program that is causing a generation to get lost. Where I was at a meeting in October of 2015 that was the final meeting for everyone on one particular NASA funding line. And that funding line was getting canceled and replaced with a different funding line. There were a couple hundred people in that room working on dozens of different funded projects. We had a $107 million budget for that particular program that was getting replaced with a different budget that only had $47 million. We knew looking around the room that most of the people in the room would lose their jobs, and they did. Our budget's getting cut again. I fired 5 people last week because I didn't have the budget to keep them. The day after sequestration, my budget got halved, and I had to let go 6 undergraduates who now all work in computer science and earn twice my salary. So they did fine. They're fine. But think about that. My students earn twice what I did, what I do. Every single one of my students has doubled my income within 1 year. And I'm supposed to be one of the leaders of my generation in my field.
I wanted to add into that, Roll, the demographics of space and NSS. I think Dale brought that up as well. That NSS, we haven't attracted really well the younger interest. It's an older type of demographic within NSS. So where do we get new markets that pulls into space and into NSS? I don't have a total answer for that, but one thing that excites me is new opportunities that are coming in because we're looking at planetary settlement. How do we construct things on Mars? How do we build landing pads and shelters and hook things together on the moon? And in my generation, in my time at NASA, most everybody had degrees in aerospace engineering, electrical engineering, my degrees in physics. But if we're going to get into construction on Moon and Mars, we need a total different attraction into students. We need students that are in civil engineering. And we haven't had them in here before. We need to be marketing into the civil engineering students. We need students that go after architecture. We need students in geology, in volcanology, in robotics. Hank Rogers operates a habitat on Mauna Loa in Hawaii where we have people that stay from 4 to 8 to 12 months. He's interested in a greenhouse. If we put a greenhouse on the moon or Mars, we've got a significant UV problem. We need botanists out of schools to come work for us. So to me, there's some exciting things as we talk about settlements and planetary construction, that it can open new markets and new demographics into space and the NSS that we ought to take advantage of.
You know, we did have some of that at one time. I still have the conference proceedings for the 1992 American Society of Civil Engineers Conference on Space Construction.
Yeah,
And
but that all died in the late 90s. But now it's coming back 20 years later.
but it's not coming back at NASA.
No, but that's all right,
Yeah,
right?
it is. Yeah, we're hiring multidisciplinary people all the
No,
time.
no, that's not
He's
what I'm
talking
talking
about
about. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people designing lunar outposts are not doing it inside of NASA.
Right. But if we're a settlement society and we know it's a matter of if not when,
Dscussion is that was a camp.
we ought to be attracting these other degree programs into NSS for new markets.
I've got one more question for the panel, and then I want to take some questions from the audience, and I know there's some hands up there. So, the news story, I'm sure that you're all well aware of, it was posted on the 23rd. The White House's fiscal year 2018 budget proposes 19 and change billion for NASA. That's $561 million less than the agency received in fiscal year 2017. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm your new president. You're welcome. Despite my accent, I was born in the United States. So I'm going to up that budget to 20 billion this year, and I would like the panelists to tell us how they think the extra 1 billion could best be spent. We've just talked about a wide range of interesting topics. If we could increase NASA's budget, where would you put it? What would be the most effective way of spending? Yes, Howard, please.
Space Act agreements, as opposed to cost-plus contracts.
Yes.
Space Act agreements for 3 basic things. The moon. I want every private industry that's interested to bid on a moon program. We have an obvious one who's already bidding on it. His name is Jeff Bezos. A private industry Mars program. We already have a contestant there. His name is Elon Musk and SpaceX. An asteroid mining program. We already have 2 candidates, Deep Space Industries and Planetary Resources. And take bids on building fuel depots in space and habitats, places you can live on the moon, on Mars, and in space itself. Those are the bids that go, those are the requests for proposal that go out. I want to see what you have to offer in those fields. I'll sort through and find the 2 or 3 best, and I'll put you competing against each other to reach milestones, and I'll only pay you on the basis of milestones. Forget cost plus, forget the Space Launch System, forget the Orion capsule, and let's get a vigorous space race going, not between us and another country, though we are in a space race with China, but between our various companies so they compete as vigorously as hockey or football teams.